I've made this series of predictions on code and software engineering, and I think people have repeatedly kind of misunderstood them. So let me lay out the spectrum, right? Like I think it was like 8 or 9 months ago or something. I said the AI model will be writing 90% of the lines of code in 3 to 6 months, which happened at least at some places, right? Happened at Anthropic, happened with many people downstream using our models. But that's actually a very weak criterion, right? People thought I was saying we won't need 90% of the software engineers. Those things are worlds apart, right? Like I would put the spectrum as 90% of code is written by the model, 100% of code is written by the model, and that's a big difference in productivity. 90% of the end-to-end SWE tasks, right, including things like compiling, including things like setting up clusters and environments, testing features, writing memos, 90% of the SWE tasks are written by the models. 100% of today's SWE tasks are written by the models. And even when that happens, it doesn't mean software engineers are out of a job. There's new higher level things they can do where they can manage. And then there's a further down the spectrum, there's 90% less demand for SWEs, which I think will happen, but this is a spectrum. And I wrote about it in the Adolescence of Technology, where I went through this kind of spectrum with farming. And so I actually totally agree with you on that. It's just these are very different benchmarks from each other, but we're proceeding through them super fast.
It seems like in part of your vision, it's like going from 90 to 100. First, it's going to happen fast, and two, that somehow that leads to huge productivity improvements. Whereas when I notice, even in greenfield projects that people start with Claude Code or something, people report starting a lot of projects, and I'm like, do we see in the world out there a renaissance of software, all these new features that wouldn't exist otherwise? And at least so far, it doesn't seem like we see that. And so that does make me wonder, even if I never had to intervene on Claude Code, there is this thing of there's just, the world is complicated, jobs are complicated, and closing the loop on self-contained systems, whether it's just writing software or something, how much broader gains we would see just from that. And so maybe that makes this should dilute our estimation of the country of geniuses.
I simultaneously agree with you, agree that it's a reason why these things don't happen instantly, but at the same time, I think the effect is going to be very fast. So I don't know, you could have these two poles, right? One is AI is it's not going to make progress. It's slow. It's going to take, kind of forever to diffuse within the economy, right? Economic diffusion has become one of these buzzwords that's a reason why we're not going to make AI progress, or why AI progress doesn't matter. And the other axis is we'll get recursive self-improvement, the whole thing, can't you just draw an exponential line on the curve? We're going to have Dyson spheres around the sun in so many nanoseconds after after we get recursive. I mean, I'm completely caricaturing the view here, but there are these two extremes. But what we've seen from the beginning, at least if you look within Anthropic, there's this bizarre 10x per year growth in revenue that we've seen, right? So, in 2023, it was 0 to 100 million. 2024, it was 100 million to $1 billion. 2025, it was $1 billion to 9 or 10 billion. And then
you guys should have just bought $1 billion with your own products, so you could just have a clean 10B.
And the first month of this year, that exponential is, you would think it would slow down, but it would we added another few billion to we added another few billion to revenue in January. And so, obviously that curve can't go on forever, right? The GDP is only so large. I would even guess that it bends somewhat this year, but that is a fast curve, right? That's a really fast curve, and I would bet it stays pretty fast even as the scale goes to the entire economy. So I think we should be thinking about this middle world where things are extremely fast, but not instant, where they take time because of economic diffusion, because of the need to close the loop, because, it's this fiddly, oh man, I have to do change management within my enterprise. I have to I set this up, but I have to change the security permissions on this in order to make it actually work. Or, I had this like old piece of software that, checks the model before it's compiled and like released, and I have to rewrite it. And yes, the model can do that, but I have to tell the model to do that. And it has to take time to do that. And so I think everything we've seen so far is compatible with the idea that there's one fast exponential that's the capability of the model, and then there's another fast exponential that's downstream of that, which is the diffusion of the model into the economy. Not instant, not slow, much faster than any previous technology, but it has its limits. And this is what we, when I look inside Anthropic, when I look at our customers, fast adoption, but not infinitely fast.
Can I try a hot take on you?
Yeah.
I feel like diffusion is cope that people use to say when it's like, if the model isn't able to do something, they're like, oh, but it's like a diffusion issue. But then you should use the comparison to humans. You would think that the inherent advantages that AIs have would make diffusion a much easier problem for new AIs getting onboarded than new humans getting onboarded. So an AI can read your entire Slack and your Drive in minutes. They can share all the knowledge that the other copies of the same instance have. You don't have this adverse selection problem when you're hiring AIs because you can just hire copies of a vetted AI model. Hiring a human is like so much more hassle. And people hire humans all the time, right? We pay humans upwards of $50 trillion in wages because they're useful, even though it's like, in principle, it would be much easier to integrate AIs into the economy than it is to hire humans. I think like the diffusion, I feel like doesn't really explain.
I think diffusion is very real, and doesn't have to, doesn't exclusively have to do with limitations on the AI models. Like, again, there are people who use diffusion to as kind of a buzzword to say this isn't a big deal. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about, AI will diffuse at the speed that previous. I think AI will diffuse much faster than previous technologies have, but not infinitely fast. So I'll just give an example of this, right? Like there's like Claude Code. Like Claude Code is extremely easy to set up. If you're a developer, you can kind of just start using Claude Code. There is no reason why a developer at a large enterprise should not be adopting Claude Code as quickly as, an individual developer or developer at a startup. And we do everything we can to promote it, right? We sell Claude Code to enterprises, and big enterprises like, big financial companies, big pharmaceutical companies, all of them, they're adopting Claude Code much faster than enterprises typically adopt new technology, right? But again, it takes time. Like any given feature or any given product, like Claude Code or like Cowork, will get adopted by the individual developers who are on Twitter all the time, by the like Series A startups, many months faster than they will get adopted by like a like large enterprise that does food sales. There are a number of factors, like you have to go through legal, you have to provision it for everyone. It has to, it has to pass security and compliance. The leaders of the company who are further away from the AI revolution, are forward-looking, but they have to say, oh, it makes sense for us to spend $50 million. This is what this Claude Code thing is. This is why it helps our company. This is why it makes us more productive. And then they have to explain to the people 2 levels below. And they have to say, okay, we have 3,000 developers. Like, here's how we're going to roll it out to our developers. And we have conversations like this every day. Like, we are doing everything we can to make Anthropic's revenue grow 20 or 30x a year instead of 10x a year. And again, many enterprises are just saying, this is so productive, like, we're going to take shortcuts in our usual procurement process, right? They're moving much faster than, when we tried to sell them just the ordinary API, which many of them use, but Claude Code is a more compelling